Hello, guys. What is up? My name is Dylan. Welcome to the Popcorn Podcast. I hope you're all having a fantastic week. So, last night I managed to catch a screening of the latest horror flick in the Conjuring series, which is, of course, The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It. So, let's get the ball rolling already. Here's a brief synopsis on the film. The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It once again follows the real-life paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren and is centered around what is known to be their most diabolical of cases. It's a story of mystery and terror and marks the first time in US history that a murder suspect would claim demonic possession as a defense in a court of law. In searching for the root of this evil and ultimately the truth behind this malevolence, the Warrens are taken beyond anything they've ever seen or encountered before. Ooh, look, I'm not gonna lie to you guys. I really like the first two Conjuring films. I think most of the other sort of spin-offs and prequels that have been in this franchise have been very underwhelming. But I think what James Wan did with those first two Conjuring films has easily been some of the best work in the horror genre, I'd say in the past 10 years or so at the very least. So naturally, this third installment was one of my most anticipated films of 2021. Even though I was a bit skeptical since James Wan wasn't actually returning to direct it. I have very mixed feelings on this film, The Devil Made Me Do It. But regardless, I'm going to start off by talking about what I actually liked. The performances across the whole cast are great. Vera Farmiga and Patrick Wilson as Lorraine and Ed Warren are once again fantastic. They've always been the heart and soul of these films, and I think I'm actually going to make a bold statement and say I think their on-screen chemistry together is some of the strongest maybe ever. They're totally believable as this pair of paranormal investigators, the supernatural elements that come with that, but of course also in making us really invested in their, in their marriage, in their actual relationship. And I think both of them, once again, are just terrific. One criticism that I have for those first two films is that even though the pair of them are great, they're almost portrayed as these sort of invincible characters. This pair who basically know every trick in the book when it comes to, demonic possession. And these characters who can basically extinguish demons and paranormal entities from the earth by just merely stating their names. So one thing that I definitely think was an improvement in this film was I actually felt like the characters Ed and Lorraine Warren were actually in serious danger, both physically and mentally. I'd say the story itself was actually pretty investing and a nice change up. It's a lot different to the first two films. It has a sort of detective style approach and involves more real world elements like, police and forensic investigations, and of course this overarching court trial that takes place. On top of that, where the first two films mainly take place in one location, this one very much has a broader geography, which I think worked well for the most part. I think the opening scene of The Devil Made Me Do It was done very well. The film moves at a pretty decent pace. I was never bored, which is always a good thing. Anyways, moving on to the mixed slash main negative, I'd say. Unfortunately, it is a big one. I just didn't think the film was that scary. Now, of course, fear is subjective, so if you were scared during the movie at any point, then great. But for me personally, I just don't think the horror worked as well this time around. And I think that there are three main reasons for why this was the case with The Devil Made Me Do It. The first reason is that I think that even though the multiple locations in this film sort of very much benefited the storytelling, because they were an essential part of the story, of course, it didn't do much for the scare factor. I think one of the reasons why the first two films were actually quite scary was the fact that they took place in one location. And there was this feeling and this sense of being trapped, and the characters couldn't just go about their everyday lives like normal because of that feeling of, being isolated and constrained to this one location. With this film sort of having a more open world story structure, even though of course there are sinister forces at play, I feel like the horror was given too much breathing space and as a result, it just wasn't as intense. My second reason is the direction. Now, I wouldn't say that this film is a badly directed film. I actually think it's pretty competently made. There are actually some really well crafted visuals, particularly with regards to body horror. However, as a whole, I feel like Michael Chave's direction here is just nowhere near as innovative as how someone like James Wan approached the first two Conjuring films, or even someone like Ari Aster did with a film like Hereditary. I'm of course talking about the technical aspects of the filmmaking of those directors. You know, the slow zooms to sort of hone your attention in on one small area to see if something is sort of moving in the distance, the panning shots, the slight jolts of the camera to reveal a section of, I don't know, a room, like a corner that's covered in darkness to see whether or not something's fucking lurking in the corner, the literal twists and turns of the camera, the pivoting of it all. Yeah, none of that was really present here in The Devil Made Me Do It. And to be honest, that's quite disappointing because I've come to expect more from horror directors like James Wan and Ari Aster, who sort of they're the ones who are looking to make and they actually have made their own personal stamp in this genre, and none of that was really present here in term well regards with the filmmaking aspects, I think. So yeah, I feel like if James Wan actually directed this film, I'm not saying Michael Chaves did a bad job. It just wasn't anything amazing, okay? And I feel like if you had someone like James Wan behind the camera, even though he has directed the previous two, and I know I said that I liked this film because it was a nice change up. It wasn't like exactly like those first two films, but I feel like James Wan could have brought a lot more in terms of directing those horror sequences, those horror moments, and just increasing the scare factor of this film. That's what I personally feel. And my third reason for why I don't think that this film was that scary was down to the supernatural aspect of the story. Without giving too much away, when you do find out what is causing all of this sort of sinister stuff to go down, it's not really shocking and it's not really at all terrifying. It feels very tangible, if that makes sense. There's an origin to the evil, there's objects associated with it, and in the third act, it's sort of revealed exactly what the characters need to do to beat it. I don't know, I just feel like that aspect of the story was a little too structured, a little too calculated, and I would have liked it if there was a little more uncertainty with it all, because I feel like, for me personally speaking, a lot of horror films that actually scare me are ones where I don't exactly know beat for beat what is going on. You know, there's some room for extra thinking. There's room for your imagination to sort of seep in and be like, oh shit, this is actually a thing. This is a possibility. And I just didn't get that here. I know it sounds like I'm rambling, but I hope that makes sense. And of course, if you guys have seen the film, you probably know what I'm sort of referring to. So my overall thoughts on The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It, is that I think the film functions well as a supernatural mystery drama with horror elements, but I don't think it necessarily works as a straight up horror film. And I think that's unfortunately going to be disappointing to a lot of people who are looking forward to this film. That is slightly disappointing for me, but nevertheless, there were still some enjoyable aspects to it. The story is solid and has characters you actually care about. And even though the horror elements were pretty lackluster, in my opinion, the story is a new and fresh take in this series of films. So on that basis, I'm going to give The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It, a B-. So that is it, guys. Those are my overall thoughts on The Conjuring 3. Of course, let me know what you thought of the movie down below in the comments section. If you were disappointed by it, if you actually thought it was alright, it wasn't that bad, you somewhat think that this is the best of the three, that would be an interesting perspective to see. And of course, if you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like. And of course, if you are new and you do love movies, you love reviews, you love the discussion around it. I do loads of these kind of videos, video essays as well. If you are into that stuff, consider subscribing to the Popcorn Podcast to jump on board the channel. Thank you guys for checking out this review. I hope you all have an amazing week, and I'll catch you very soon in the next video.